Welcome to Adversity to Ascension. I'm your host, Dr. Sandra Cox, and this is a podcast about turning difficulties in your life into meaning and success. And today, I am so happy to welcome a friend of mine whom I met on social media and has become a very dear friend of mine. Her name is Carol Chea. She is from Kentucky, lives in the Appalachian Mountains. And Carol has a very special story to tell you today about her spiritual evolution. So welcome, Carol. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. So
Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. Carol, you have your own podcast called Solitary Magic. Tell us sort of the story, how you came to that, what your background is, what you've been up to.
Well, I was born in Middlesboro, Kentucky. It's this big, but it's the home of Lee Majors. So that's our claim to fame.
Okay.
He was born there. So I was raised by a mom and dad who were hardworking. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a coal truck driver. My grandfather owned a coal tipple. So we were coal country people. And my grandfather was a Southern Baptist pastor. So I was raised in the Southern Baptist church. When I was 4, we moved from Kentucky to a little town that's a little bigger than Middlesboro, called La Follette, Tennessee. And I was raised there. And we moved to a church there that I spent 30 years of my life in. Got married at 21 and had 2 kids. My ex-husband was a deacon. I was a Sunday school teacher and a WANA director. If it was going on in the church, I did it. I sang, played music, all of it. So I spent my entire life in the Southern Baptist Church and believed the doctrine to a fault and believed it so much that it became my whole identity. And it also caused quite a bit of stress because I never felt that I was living up to what was being expected of me. So in 2014, we moved back to Kentucky. My ex-husband is military and he was sent back to Kentucky. And it was a great move for all of us. It started to expand our worldview a bit, coming from a little town, coming to the big city of Lexington, Kentucky. My kids were able to meet new people, and we joined a new church that was a little more progressive than what I was used to. And but there was still that evangelical framework, and my world crumbled when my husband asked for a divorce in 2018.
Oh, wow.
And up until that point, I had been a stay-at-home mom. I homeschooled my kids. My entire world was living under the evangelical umbrella of protection. And after he decided that marriage wasn't for us, and it was, looking back on it now, it was a good move for both of us, but it was a definite culture shock for me. Everything fell apart for me. I had done everything the way I was supposed to do according to the church. I raised my kids and followed the words that were given to me from the pulpit, and it fell apart. So that led to a massive existential crisis for me. And
I can imagine.
As I started to unravel, I actually started to piece myself back together and realize that what I had been taught, the lessons that I had learned, the doctrine that had been shoved down my throat wasn't accurate. And I started meeting people that didn't fit the mold, and people that I was told were lost and never going to be saved. And I realized that none of that was true. So I started looking for different spiritual paths. And I remembered my great-grandmother, who was what we would have called a holler witch back home.
Oh, yes. Yes. I have a great grandmother that fit that as well. You and I have a lot in common.
Yeah. she was the healer. Everybody went to her if they needed a poultice or a salve or whatever. You went to my mama. And she also had prophetic dreams. And I started thinking about her and the things that she would say and the ways that she would do things. She didn't attend church, but she said she loved Jesus. And so I started thinking about her and the lessons that she taught me. And it led me on the path of discovering what Appalachian witchcraft is. And that opened my mind tremendously. And then that led me to study and starting my own podcast to talk about it. And here we are. Big journey.
Yes, big journey. And so, you mentioned, sort of being a perfectionist as a part of trying to be the good evangelical wife,
right,
and wife of someone in the church. And how did you reconcile those two things? And did you find the intersection of those two things to be a difficult one?
Extremely difficult. And there are times I have been out of the church now for 6, almost 7 years. And there are times that I still have flashbacks. I still get a little panicked because I think about the lessons that I learned and the doctrine that I was, exposed to every day from birth. And I have to remind myself that it's okay to not know all the answers and to be a little afraid sometimes. That's okay. Sitting by myself and allowing the universe to speak to me on a one-on-one level, that kind of relationship that I always wanted from the church that I never really felt, I feel now without having to name it as a God or, in a religious sense.
On your podcast, you talk a lot about the various deities that you sort of commune with at times in your meditations. And I think that for those of us who have a meditative practice, there are many of us probably who commune with those entities or deities or spirits, whatever one would like to call them. But you also call them by name, and you also talk about not just what they mean to you, but what they mean from a historical point of view.
Right.
And how did you, I don't imagine that you knew much about that before you made this conversion.
No, nothing. Yeah. Nothing at all. Reading those kinds of things would have been considered, taboo and off limits. But I am a researcher by nature. I'm a Scorpio. I have to know the answers. So I dig into books. I go to websites. I talk to tons of people. And the one thing that I have discovered through my journey is that what we call deity, and this is for me because I don't think there is a right way to witch and there's not a wrong way to witch. But for me in this journey and the research that I've done and the meditations that I participate in, I get to be a participant in those, which is a wonderful thing. They're not mine. I just get to visit. Yes. I have found that deities as a whole are man-made answers to the fabric of the universe.
Yes.
And we get different representations of deity depending on the situation we're in, the answers that we need, the direction we're going. So when Hecate comes to me, or when the Morrigan has walked through my living room as 7 feet tall, or when Brigid has has taken me across her water in her boat.
Mm-hmm.
Those are representations that the universe, that I believe the divine feminine is sending me at the time that I need those to get
Yes.
specific lessons. And when I am presented with a deity that has a name, I'm able to go in and dig in and research and see what those deities represent. And then I say, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
So
Right.
it's fascinating. It
Yes.
makes me tingly.
Yes, it absolutely is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And in my life, I grew up also in the Southern Baptist Church, but not nearly as long as you did.
Mm-hmm.
I was about 12 years old when my parents decided they weren't going to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And I was grateful because as a child, I had sat in Sunday school and listened to the Bible stories, particularly the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, in the New Testament, the crucifixion of Christ and the way the story was told, it just, God seemed abusive to me. And I couldn't reconcile that on the one hand, they're teaching God is love. And on the other hand, look what God is doing to his people and to his son. And I couldn't understand it. It didn't seem right to me. So I just sort of left it behind at the age of 12. And I grew up on a farm, out in nature. I didn't have other kids to play with. And I was always wandering around out in the woods looking for fairies under the May apples, and you do.
All the time. Saw a few too, and it was terrifying, but yeah.
Yes. And as I got older, I was just really drawn to the turning of the seasons, and it seemed, all of that seemed really deeply sacred to me. And interestingly enough, when I went into psychiatry residency, I was very drawn to Carl Jung.
Here.
Yeah, you too. Yes. I mean, and much to the dismay of my residency director and all of my attendings, because they were hardcore Freudian. And they wouldn't, you brought up Carl Jung and they kind of looked at you like you had three heads and,
Right.
you mean that schizophrenic? So, right. But his concept of the archetypes was fascinating to me, because as I started to understand my draw to nature-based spiritualities and the deities of those spiritualities, I started to understand that those are archetypes that will live through us at different periods of our lives. So so not even understanding. I mean, I think I grew up mostly living the archetype of Persephone, quite frankly, because of some of the traumas I went through.
Right.
Persephone was drug into the underworld by Hades, and but then I started to understand other ones that were moving through me. And so when you talk in your podcast about Hecate and the Morrigan and Brigid, Brigid, it makes me think of that this is who's living through you in that moment, for that moment.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly what I experience. And it is fascinating to me. I think that is also one aspect that helped me as I've been working through religious trauma, of which I have a plenty. And it has helped me to understand that deity is something that I can create. It's something that I can draw on, but it's also something that I can craft, and that that's okay, because it is all part of the oneness of everything.
Yes.
And when I realized that, I sat in the middle of my floor and just sobbed, because I realized that I no longer had to sit and be afraid of this God figure that had been placed, in my life from childhood. I didn't have to be afraid of him anymore. And I didn't have to beg him to forgive me anymore, because there was nothing to forgive. And that was the most freeing experience I have ever had. So
that's so beautiful.
It was wonderful. And I get to have that experience all the time. It's, as I've developed more into my practice, being Southern Baptist and going to church 3 or 4 days a week and understanding the program and the way that the services are arranged, I tried to make my practice look like that. And as I've developed more into the practice, my practice is just who I am on a daily basis. And if I'm out for a walk, I'm in my practice. If I'm, playing with my dog, I'm in my practice. It's who I am. It's not necessarily what I do.
Right.
I read a quote the other day that said, the more you learn about witchcraft, the fewer spells you do.
Yes.
Because it's just who you are. And it's the way I operate my life. It's a mindset shift more than an action. So it has definitely helped me with the religious trauma, with dealing with the trauma that I experienced as a child. It has helped me to heal from all of that.
That's beautiful. Tell us a little bit about your practice and what you say to others about the practice. Because there are a lot of people who believe that it's sort of proscripted.
Yes.
What do you say about that?
The number one question I get is, what kind of spell can I do to get X? And and I always tell people, if you are looking to me or looking to anybody for words that you can say and what color of candle you need to light to get something out of it, you've missed the point entirely.
Right.
And that's why on my podcast, I don't share spells. I could go into spell work that I do, but for me, spell work is very individual. It's very private. It's something that changes for me from day to day, but it's also something that can be very, very simple. And I find that if I am looking for clarification for something, I will develop a spell, a working, as my mama would say, off the cuff. And it will be something as simple as on a walk, if a leaf or a stone or a twig, anything jumps out at me, that comes home with me, and it goes on the altar. I make my own candles, and that for me is a therapeutic way to work through things that are going on in my head. And then those candles will go on my altar. I'll also go to the Dollar Tree and buy a lot of cheap stuff. You don't need a lot of expensive doodads and things. But I have to field questions like that quite often. Well, how do you think what kind of spell do I need to do if I want to get somebody to like me, or if I want to curse somebody or whatever? No, you're missing the point. You're trying to operate against somebody else's free will. Why are you doing that? Let's work on yourself. And for me, witchcraft is working on me, making me a better person in the universe that can then help other people and work on developing community. A lot of people don't remember, or if they've never done the research, they don't understand that witchcraft is 100% political, and it is 100% a movement of women, female presenting especially, to stand up to patriarchy, to stand up to
Yes.
those systems of oppression that we've all had to deal with. And it is a way to draw your community together, to work together, to learn how to operate as a single unit while respecting everybody's individual belief systems. And I think that's why men throughout history were terrified of us, because we didn't
That's right.
bow down and let them tell us what we believed. And
No.
finding that strength from my ancestors who practiced this way, it's so powerful.
Some of our ancestors pretended, like they bought they bought into the other belief system just to survive.
Yes.
And as I said on one of my TikToks the other day, we're all here, regardless of our race or ethnicity.
Right.
We're all here because some of our ancestors survived oppression at some point in history. And so we are descendants of survivors, which is something that I think we all need to remember, particularly at this turning point in our history here in the United States and the world in general.
Absolutely. Yes.
But yes, and a lot of people don't realize that many of the Christian holidays and and a lot of the Catholic, particularly in the Catholic Church, the Catholic traditions are based on pagan holidays, nature-based holidays, and nature-based rituals. In that, and the Crusaders, the Catholics back then, the Christians back then, whatever they were, had to do that in order to get our ancestors to kind of go along. And of course, our ancestors recognized we go along or we get burned at the stake.
Yes, exactly.
So we're going to say we're going along, much like Brigid did.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Brigid was, she was a priestess in a temple of the goddess, and she was a keeper of the eternal flame. And so she became a nun.
Yes. Yes. I have a great story about Brigid.
Please tell it, please.
Brigid is the first, when I first started dipping my toes into witchcraft, she was the first deity that I was approached by. And I'd gone into meditation. And again, coming from Southern Baptist Church, meditation was a no-no.
Right.
So I sat down and I lit a candle and I said, okay, I want to try this. And 5 minutes into that, I was approached by this very fierce woman who looked like me, a lot of curly red hair. And she put me in a boat, and there were no words spoken. She put me in a boat, and we were in the middle of a lake, and I could feel the water. I could feel the boat rocking.
Yes. And
it was a surreal moment. And I came out of that about 45 minutes later thinking, okay, this is new. But Brigid, it's funny, my husband and I, when we got engaged, we said, okay, we need to pick a date. And we chose February 1st. I have no idea why we chose the 1st of February. Who gets married in February?
Yes.
But looking back on that, that is in bulk. That's Brigid's Day. And
that is the Feast of Brigid.
Yes. And so after I realized that and I met Brigid and I started doing research into her, I went, oh, that's why I got married on February 1st.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
So I always have that connection.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yes. I have been blessed to run across other women who have been drawn into the nature-based spiritualities and who taught me what it was that I had been doing. I didn't know there was a name for it, right?
Right. True.
And they're like, well, come and join us.
Mm-hmm.
And our practice was so beautiful. We would come together on what we call the Sabbats, and we would gather together, and we would have our sacred time in sacred space, creating sacred space, and then we would feast. Right? We would all make something and bring it and share time together and talk about why we were there. But our belief is that we don't do harm to other people, and we don't wish harm on other people, nor do we do spells to do harm on other people. That's really that's really kind of in my opinion, a made up kind of
Agreed.
false spirituality, because in our belief system, if we do harm to someone else or wish harm in some sort of prayer type spell, that will come back on us threefold.
Right. Right. The universe demands balance, and it will have balance however it's going to get it. And, we can blame a lot of the witchcraft phenomenon on practical magic and Harry Potter, which I love both of those. But witchcraft is, for me, not about what I do. It's about who I am and how I can serve, how I can help. And I get very frustrated, and I talk about it on my podcast a lot, that if you're looking for steps 1, 2, and 3, stop. And if you are looking at TikTok, especially, and TikTok is rife with, witchcraft content. And there's so many people who are putting out videos showing their altar and showing all of these things that they're doing on their altar. And I warn people against following that too closely.
Right.
That can become a dangerous thing, especially if you aren't prepared personally for what that could entail. Do I think that you're going to have a demon come through a candle and attack you? No, I don't. But I do think that it can affect you mentally, psychologically, spiritually.
Yes.
And that could do more harm than good. So I always warn people to be careful who you follow, be careful who you talk to, be careful who you put your trust in, because you don't really know where they're trying to lead you. And if they're looking for clicks and likes and views, that's not who you want to be giving your time to.
Right. And I think as you said in this last episode on your podcast, you don't know who they are when they're not on camera making their content.
Yeah.
So
true.
they could be anybody, and you're inviting their energy into your world.
Yeah.
And that means their energy is going to be interacting with your own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing for me. And I have spent the past few months really in, I don't want to say isolation. That sounds really sad, but I've spent a lot of time in just quiet reflection. And I've done a lot of reading and a lot of sitting. And for me, I have ADHD. It is a miracle that I'm sitting here talking to you and I'm not walking around my room. So for me to sit and contemplate, I have done a lot of sitting and staring out the window. And I believe that the universe has been using that time to prepare me for the season that we're in now, the political climate that we're in. It has given me a calmness to be able to use logic and to figure my way through this and to reach out to people and start forming the communities that we're going to have as we continue through this season. If I had been my normal self that is busy, I run, I have 50 irons and 50 different fires all the time, I wouldn't have been prepared.
Right.
But it's allowed me a calmness that I think is life-saving.
Yeah.
So, and I have to thank the spirituality that I found for that. If I was still in the evangelical church, I don't know where I would be right now, to be honest.
I think you would be, I'm guessing, seated in a lot of fear.
Oh, absolutely.
A
Yeah.
lot of fear. Or if for those who are part of the evangelical church that follows and aligns with this political movement,
I
right?
know. And I was
Um,
aligned with it for many, many years.
right, right.
Because that was, if you were Baptist, you were Republican. That's just the way it was. We had
Mm-hmm.
one Democrat family in our church,
Mm-hmm.
and they were picked at a lot. Um, you if you didn't vote Republican, did you really love Jesus? It was debatable.
Maybe,
So
maybe that's why my parents left the church, because they were Democrats,
possibly,
and and their families, you know, were, everyone was Democrat.
yeah,
So
that's
that's
very
interesting. I never
possible.
thought of that.
Yeah.
There is a rise of interest in witchcraft or
Right.
the nature-based spiritualities. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think a lot of that is social media. It perpetuates so much. We see trends set all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also think that there is something stirring,
Mm-hmm.
and we have felt it. And especially what I find fascinating is I'm seeing people who are older, people who are in middle age, women who are in their crone era.
Yes.
Um, we are the ones that seem to have all awoken together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pull that feels as old as the universe itself.
Yes.
And for me, and I've talked to a lot of people around my age about this, it's as though the Divine Mother herself said, okay, now you're ready. This is what I've been preparing you for, and it's
Mm-hmm.
been
Mm-hmm.
stewing down in your spirit,
Mm-hmm.
and it's time. And she flipped a switch. And a lot of people have said, oh, wait, what is
Mm-hmm.
this? Well,
Mm-hmm.
we've heard about the 4 a.m. club that's all over TikTok,
Right.
and
Right.
talking about different levels of ascension, and all of that is wonderful. And I think it's all connected to the collective consciousness of those of us who are old enough to see what is going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
old enough to have lived to see things earlier, and to see things before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fascinating thing to watch and to be part of. I also think that it's very easy with, pop culture affects things. And we see, like I said, you have the practical magic effect. It's a great
Right.
movie, but you see a lot of people who love the aesthetic. And I've talked about this on my podcast. You
Mm-hmm.
have the witchcraft aesthetic, and people love to see especially during the fall, when you have your pumpkins and your black cats and all the things that are traditionally witchy.
Right.
But they aren't really doing any kind of soul searching or any kind of introspection. So,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and I think as time goes on, you will have people to leave that behind and go on to something else. But there is definitely a growth of us who come from all different walks of life, from all over, and we're finding so much commonality that it has to be divinely inspired. There's
Yes.
no way that this is just something that we've seen on TV and we're trying to emulate.
Right. Right. I completely agree with you that there is a stirring, that it is an ancient archetypal stirring.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that our connection with the earth. In our spirituality, as you said in your last podcast, God is in everything.
Yes.
The goddess is in everything, every rock, every tree, every animal, every plant, the ocean, the rivers. And our planet is crying out for help because she's being destroyed.
Right.
And because, the ancient religions think of the planet, the earth, as feminine.
Right.
Right? The masculine is the sun that
Yes.
comes and gives energy to the earth. But the earth and the moon are feminine. And because I think those of us who are in touch with that feminine side of ourselves, and not all women are, just because you're a woman or you're femme presenting, doesn't mean you're in touch with the feminine side of yourself.
Right.
But when you are, then you can't help but feel connected to the earth. And I think,
yes,
I really believe that the earth is speaking to us and saying, I need you to help me heal. And that can only be done by bringing back to humanity the feminine qualities of empathy and compassion and nurturing that the feminine does.
Yes, absolutely. 100% agree. And that's why I spend so much time telling people to form community and to stop looking at whether the person next to you voted a specific way or not.
Right.
That damage has been done. And now we all have to work together to heal that damage. That doesn't mean that people who voted to cause the damage aren't going to have to deal with it. They will, and they are, but we all are dealing with it as well. And if we approach people who disagree with us politically in a way that makes us feel superior, we aren't tapping into our feminine energy. We are allowing hubris to take over, and it blocks us from being able to form community. Something as simple as getting to know your neighbors, making sure that your neighbor down the street, take their garbage cans in for them.
Right.
Anything you can do to serve people serves the planet, because the planet picks up on that energy and is able to use that energy and recycle that energy. And it just goes in a loop. When we feed her, she feeds us.
That's
and it happens with very, very small things. I think we all get it into our heads that we have to do these massive performative actions, when really all we may need to do is hold a door for somebody, or give somebody a ride, or, offer to light a candle for somebody. It's very simple.
The little moments of kindness throughout the day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems like to me that this spiritual belief has really been a blessing for you. You've really, And I feel the same way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has changed every aspect of my being. It's made me into a person that I wasn't 10 years ago. I don't even recognize that person from 10 years ago. But I feel very fortunate that she existed, because she had the bravery to allow this person to be here. And so I owe past me a lot of respect for having the bravery to step out and to do something different.
Well, I'm sure glad I know of her and I know you. My life is so much richer because of that. So thank you for being my friend, and thank you for coming on the podcast. And everyone out there, I hope that you will tune into Carol's podcast, Solitary Magic. Carol, where can we find it?
anywhere that you get podcasts. It's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. I've taken a couple of weeks off for vacation and illness, but I'm working on the new episode and it should be out next week.
I can't wait. I'll catch you later.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Carol, for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners, or listener, as it may be. And thank you, Brian and Shayna of Procast Studio. I couldn't do this without you. Please, if you like this episode, if you like this show, hit the like and subscribe button, and you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere you get your podcasts. So thanks for joining us, and tune in for more.
You can be a fighter every single day.